right, we are live. Kia ora koutou. Kia ora e ngā mana ko hui mai nei ki tēnei rorohiko ki te kōrero i ngā whakaro ka nui te aroha. My name is Geoff Simmons. I'm an economist and the leader of the Opportunities Party, and I'm also the candidate for Rongotai in the 2020 election. Rongotai, if you don't know, is sort of the south and east area of Wellington, sort of from Newtown south and east of there. So this was supposed to be my roadshow tonight. It was going to be out at Miramar, but of course, because of level 2 restrictions, we're bringing it online and experimenting with a new delivery format. So the idea is we've got a Zoom call set up, and people can join that. You can also watch this a bit more passively on Facebook and YouTube and all those other channels. But if you want to ask questions, I'll be prioritizing the people in the Zoom chat once I've done my presentation. So if you want to get in on that, the link is in the event, which is on the top Facebook page. So without further ado, I'll kick into it, and I'll be doing a short presentation, and then we'll have plenty of time for your questions. So as I mentioned, I'm an economist. I've spent my career researching answers to New Zealand's biggest problems, really, and then watched career politicians throw those solutions in the too hard basket. So I figured if you can't beat them, join them. And so I became a politician. I mean, after all, the only way to become less popular than an economist is by being a politician, right? And like most politicians, I love this country. I truly believe that Aotearoa New Zealand is a proud nation of explorers, innovators, and pioneers. We were the first place to give women the vote. Most of us know that, but we're also the most distant landmass to be colonized, and that was a truly incredible achievement, I think, which is worth looking into if you haven't before. And we are often rated as one of the best places in the world to live, to visit, to bring up children, all that sort of stuff. We still see ourselves as this land of opportunity where a beekeeper can go on to be the first to climb the highest mountain, a place where anyone can, with some effort, actually achieve their potential. And we kind of pride ourselves on that, pride on making sure that everyone has a fair go. And pretty much across the spectrum, politicians say that they want to keep it that way. They have their different slants on it. Labour talks more about the environment from which people come, and National talks more about the value of hard work. But basically, they all agree on that idea of a fair go, or of giving people the opportunity to reach their potential. But there's only one problem with that story that we tell ourselves. It's a complete myth. That land of opportunity no longer exists, if it ever did. We have some of the most expensive housing and rents in the world. It's easier to make money in New Zealand by speculating on land than it is by investing in businesses that actually create jobs and exports. And as a result of that obsession we have with housing and the sky-high house prices that we have, those problems just sort of leak into every part of our society, because housing since the mid-1990s has been the main driver of increased child poverty. And we're seeing so much of the knock-on effects of those high rates of child poverty. We have some of the highest incarceration rates in the world, some of the highest teen suicide rates in the world. And of course, when those children get to school, many of them are 2 years behind their classmates. So people from poor backgrounds, when they turn up to school, are 2 years behind their classmates. This is, that's 40% of their lives. At the age of 5, they've got the developmental age of a 3-year-old. And if you can blame their parents if you like, but it doesn't make any difference to that situation. And our education system does a hell of a good job on the smell of an oily rag to try and close that gap. But the fact is that they can't, because people from better backgrounds, better off backgrounds, their parents donate to schools, their parents get involved in administering the schools, and of course they do more for their kids during the school holidays. They can take them places, they can give them enriching experiences. So the upshot of this is that when our kids from our poorest households reach 17, they're still 2 years behind. They've got the developmental age of a 15-year-old. This is some of the biggest gap due to poverty in the Western world. I mean, and just think about that for a moment, what it was like when you were doing whatever it was called when you were at school, when you were doing NCEA level 3 or bursary or university entrance, whatever it was called. Now imagine trying to sit that when you were 15 instead of 17, because that's what we ask the bottom 20% of our population to do. So I don't think we can say that New Zealand has equality of opportunity, that we give everyone a fair go when, right from the outset, some kids from certain backgrounds are 2 years behind their classmates. We wonder why people from poor backgrounds didn't take up the fees free that Labor brought in back in 2018. And the reason is they can't get into the courses that they want to do. It's nothing to do with the fees being, the cost of the courses. Pretty much all of the kids from poor backgrounds that can go to university do go to university already. Fees made no difference, because the problem isn't at the age of 17. The problem starts way back at early childhood, at the age of 3. And that's where we need to fix the situation. On the issue of, while we're talking about equality of opportunity, millennials are the first generation that, by all statistics, appear to be worse off than their parents were at the same age, with the exception of height. That's the one statistic where millennials are winning. But everywhere else, they're worse off in terms of incomes, job security, wealth, certainly wealth, because they're completely unable to get onto the housing ladder. On top of that, we're expecting them to deal with a climate crisis, freshwater problems, the loss of our native species, and we wonder why we've got a mental health crisis. I mean, this is not what equality of opportunity looks like. This is not what a fair go looks like. So TOP is very much like the other parties in that we believe in a fair go, and we believe in giving everyone the opportunity to reach their potential. But the difference with TOP is that we think it's going to take real change for that opportunity to exist. And TOP has the courage, the skills, and the ideas to actually make that change and ensure that everyone has the opportunity to succeed. Because it is going to take courage above all. We know what the solutions are. The solutions have been put forward by experts year after year, tax working group after tax working group after tax working group. There's been a lot of them, and they've all said similar things. So we know what the answers are. It's about having the courage to actually do it. And that's why our slogan this year is don't leave change to chance, because we believe that a vote for anyone else really is leaving change to chance. And that's why we want you to vote TOP. So here's what I'm going to talk about tonight. I'll blast through these basic, these are our 4 key priorities for 2020, and I'll talk those through. First up is affordable housing and rent. Let's call it. Our housing market is a hot, sticky mess, and we can't ignore it any longer. It wouldn't be a TOP presentation without a graph in there, but I think you'll agree this is a pretty shocking one, and it shows that rents and house prices have grown faster than incomes for 30 years, under red, under blue, and it shows no sign of letting up now. If we updated that graph, it's still going up to this day, even in the midst of a pandemic. It's crazy. Now, this is the reason why we have poverty in New Zealand. In terms of the growth in poverty over the last 30 years is almost entirely due to this issue. We showed with COVID that if we set our minds to anything, we can really deal to it. And, we're showing that again with the lockdown in Auckland. But I think that's a really positive thing, because a lot of people have come to believe that there is no alternative. Housing is just going to be unaffordable in New Zealand, but it doesn't need to be this way. If we make it our single-minded priority, just like we did with COVID, then we can deal to this. The other good thing about COVID is that the saying is flatten the curve, right? That's what we're trying to do with COVID. And that's exactly what we need to do with house prices as well. We need to hold house prices and rents stable for 30 years to allow incomes catch up. And if you think that that's impossible, take a look at the bottom line on that graph. That's Germany. And although Germany has gone up a little bit in recent years, it's essentially what they've achieved. House prices and rents have been stable for 30 years. But to do this, we need to stop pretending that buying and selling houses off each other is a way to grow the economy. I mean, it's not an economy. It's a Ponzi scheme. It is absolutely crazy. We simply can't get rich buying and selling houses off each other. It's just a transfer of wealth from those at the bottom to those at the top. And that's usually the younger to the older. So we have to shake that out of our minds. And one thing I've noticed this election is that the only people that are advertising more than politicians at the moment are real estate agents. That's a real bad sign for me that something is seriously wrong in our economy. We need to shake this idea that rising house prices are a good thing. You see screams of joy on the Herald or Stuff every time that happens. And the reason, at least for the Herald, is because real estate is their biggest source of advertising revenue. So we've got to break that. We've got to break our belief that rising house prices are a good thing. Whenever house prices and rents rise, it's a social and an economic disaster. Economic disaster I'll cover now. Again, another graph, apologies for this, but a lot of people understand the problems on the supply side of housing, but not on the demand side. And our tax system is a big issue. Fun fact, we have some of the highest taxes on other investments in the Western world. So that includes businesses, bank deposits, and KiwiSaver. And we also have some of the lowest tax rates on housing in the Western world. And that difference, the difference between the two, is the reason to speculate on housing. That's the biggest difference between the tax treatment of housing and the tax treatment of other investments in the Western world. No wonder we put more of our money into housing than any other country in the world. And the flip side of that, if you're paying attention, is that we put less of our money into business than any other country in the world. So not only do we have the highest house prices in the world, but we have some of the lowest wages in the Western world. This is crazy. We're starving our businesses of the money that they need to grow, and ultimately they'd be able to pay us higher wages so we could afford to pay for these crazy house prices. So this hole in our tax system is one of the issues with our housing problem. And everyone knows about this. All the politicians know about it. Bill English knows about it. Winston certainly knows about it. But the thing is that they don't have the courage to have a sensible conversation about it. So what do we need to do? Firstly, we need to tax housing the same as other assets. There's a whole bunch of ways to do that. If we go back to this graph, we can increase the tax on property, or we can reduce the tax on other investments, or we can do a bit of both to make them meet in the middle. And that's exactly what Germany does. We need to manage, second up, we need to manage immigration. Over the past decade, we've had the highest immigration, the highest managed immigration in the Western world, and we haven't been building our infrastructure fast enough. We need to get infrastructure matched with our immigration rates. Third, we will encourage quality, affordable apartments, medium density housing around our public and active transport networks. And this is a big issue for Rongotai, the area where I'm standing, because our current MP has been a total roadblock on things like medium density housing and on cycle lanes. There's 80,000 people that need to be fit into Wellington over the next 30 years. We simply cannot fit those people in if we continue sprawling and if we think that everyone's going to be able to get around in a car. We have to offer people other ways of getting around. TOP's vision is that you should be able to get everywhere you need from where you live within 15 minutes by foot, by bike, or by public transport. And that is only achievable if we invest more in our cities so that they can build up. And I'll come back to that point on what's needed there later on. Lastly, housing is going to take a generation to fix, so we will need stronger renters' rights in the meantime. Housing is the #1 issue facing a huge number of Kiwis. We need to make sure that housing is a human right, that it is, it's a home, not a get-rich-quick scheme. So that's our housing policy. Second up is the UBI. And this is a simple idea, but it takes quite a bit to get your head around. And that's because when you are thinking of the tax system, we usually think the tax system and the welfare system as two separate things. But actually, they're part of the same system. And the reason for that is because this graph shows that what happens to your income, how much income on the y-axis, how much income you get for each hour that you work. That's on the x-axis. So as you move left to right, you can see that your income goes along for a bit and then suddenly drops down to a very low level between $2 and $4 an hour. And the reason behind this is because not only are you paying tax, but you're also losing your benefit. So that works like a tax as well. And that's why I say that beneficiaries are actually the highest tax group in this country. Beneficiaries often pay between 80% and 100% tax rates. That means that very little of the money that they, from each hour that they work, that they actually get to keep. And I ask you, would you get out of bed and work for between $2 and $4 an hour? Would you? Because if not, then you're a lazy dole bludger. Or at least that's what we say about our beneficiaries, because we present them with this deal, and the ones that turn their nose up on it, turn their nose up at it, often I think quite fairly, because they're not getting anything out of it, we call them dole bludgers. It's just a stupid system. Don't blame the beneficiary, blame the welfare trap. This is the welfare trap, this big hole here. So, what did I do there? Excuse me, folks. I somehow skipped right to the end of my slide. Anyway, so what we have here is our universal basic income proposal, which is $250 a week for everyone. What would you do if you had $250 a week? Would you retrain, start a business, spend more time with your kids? TOP trusts our fellow Kiwis and wants to give them the freedom to pursue their own goals. That's why we want a UBI. It's been trialled overseas and it works. And before you ask, no, people don't blow their money on alcohol and ciggies. The main benefit of it is that it removes the welfare trap, and it's our current welfare system and that welfare trap that traps the most vulnerable in poverty, and that is the big failure of our current system. So just to go back to this slide, imagine that you are a beneficiary trying to move off the job seeker benefit. Again, you get about $250 a week, and you are moving into work. It's a bit like Indiana Jones, you've got winds behind you chasing you with spears, and you're trying to move forward, and then you come to the edge of this cliff where it just drops away. And you can see that for the next 20 hours, you'd be working for between $2 and $4 per hour in order to get this, get the benefits.
Maybe something to do with what we did the other day.
Can we mute that person who's just come on
that was
the stream, because that's extremely distracting. There we go. Okay, so we ask beneficiaries to swing across this divide, okay? To swing to the other side. They have to work almost 25 hours before they start to see the benefit of that work in terms of actually getting a higher income. So, and we're asking them to swing into the unknown in a gig economy where often it isn't clear how many hours they're going to get that week, or at least, you know, you don't know how many hours you get this week, you don't know how many hours you get next week. So very easily, if we ask them to swing across that gap, that the vine will break and they will fall down into that welfare trap. So it is a mammoth risk for people moving off the benefit and into work. By the way, the Greens GMI makes this problem even worse. Of course, it's more generous to people who are, who are on these benefits. It's higher than the job seekers allowance. But the downside with it is it extends that welfare trap even further. So effectively, we were under the Greens GMI, we'd be asking people to move from a few hours a week all the way out to full-time work before they would actually see the benefit of working. So it would make that welfare trap even larger than it is now. And here is what the welfare trap looks like with a UBI. So this is on the job seeker benefit and on the minimum wage. With a UBI and a flat tax, they always have that incentive to work. And this is the main benefit of a UBI. Of course, there's other benefits in terms of, you know, honouring unpaid work and it being a universal training allowance as well. But removing that welfare trap is really crucial. A UBI really benefits the working poor. And remember that about 40% of the children in poverty in New Zealand are growing up in families where the adults are working. So, you know, there is a real big group of working poor. And the UBI would really help them. So someone on the minimum wage with the UBI would get about $6,000 more a year. That takes them over the living wage. And the benefit of the UBI is gradually reduced for the richer people by the flat tax. And by the way, while we're speaking about the living wage, why is it that we expect businesses to pay for the crazy cost of living when the cost of living is really driven by the high cost of housing? So I absolutely agree that people should get a living wage, but why do we expect businesses to pay that? And remember, this is in the environment where there's massive workforce changes on the way. Many jobs are going to be lost to the history books due to artificial intelligence and automation. 1 in 8 of you out there will lose your jobs over the next decade. I'm not predicting widespread unemployment in the next decade, but you will need to retrain. This whole idea of 40-hour-a-week jobs for life is history. It's gone. People are going to need to retrain to start businesses, and the UBI helps them do that without having to crawl through the doors of WINS. So we support a UBI of $250 a week. No ifs, no buts, no wins. Everyone gets it, but we claw it back off the rich with a flat tax. This is what a modern, simple, and fair tax and welfare system looks like. It will save billions in bureaucracy, and that's a big way that we propose to pay for this UBI, is through massive savings in bureaucracy and getting rid of all of the other fiddly little schemes that we need to help people in certain situations. By the way, while we're talking about bureaucracy, it's worth giving a hat tip to ACT's welfare policy, which they want to put everyone on electronic payment management. That's all beneficiaries after a certain amount of time, which is actually going to increase the amount of bureaucracy in our welfare system. So nice one, ACT, for employing more bureaucrats and costing taxpayers even more. The one thing that's probably difficult to understand about this is these things called dynamic benefits. So what we've seen when a UBI has been trialled overseas is we've seen 4 major benefits, and I'll just briefly go through those and set out why we think they will generate that amount of money. First off, As I've mentioned, because the welfare trap's gone, people will work more, they pay more tax, everyone wins. Secondly, if you're not working more, it's because you're more likely to be in training. And people that are in training have higher incomes. People who have higher incomes are paying more tax, everyone wins. Thirdly, if you are not in work, you're also more likely to be spending more time with your kids. And we know that parents who spend more time with their kids preschool are, developed kids that are more likely to be much more productive for society, productive members of society, less likely to have, behavioral issues, more likely to have to get better trained and have better lifetime outcomes, less likely to have criminal impacts or impacts on the social welfare system, all that sort of stuff. So again, everyone wins from that particular point. And the fourth aspect of the dynamic benefits that we see, even if the UBI is paid at the same rate as the basic benefit, which is what we're proposing here, $250 a week, the same as the job seeker allowance, just the fact that you don't have to go crawling through the doors of WINS to get it means that that your mental health issues drop by a third. And when mental health issues drop, alcohol and drug abuse drops, all of those associated issues drop, and of course health costs drop as well. So there's a whole bunch of dynamic benefits that we expect from bringing in the UBI, and that will essentially allow this to pay for itself. If those benefits don't materialize, then we do have a property tax up our sleeve, as we discussed before, but we don't think we're going to need it. And in fact, we think we can't afford not to do the UBI. So that's the UBI, though. That's housing in the UBI. Another priority for us is smart small business. Labor listens to unions. National speaks for big business. But for a long time, the 500,000 small businesses in New Zealand have been politically homeless, and we think they deserve better support in this difficult time. As I mentioned, people will be able to get the UBI under our policies, and that is fantastic for helping people start businesses. We also want to abolish provisional tax. This is part of our plan to make the interaction between small business and government a whole lot simpler. And provisional tax is punitive, it's complex, and we don't need it. We'll just get rid of it. We have a whole bunch of other things that we want to do, but that's really the flagship of that sort of simplification of the way that small business and government interacts. We also propose to remove fringe benefit tax from low emissions vehicles. So this is the tax that people pay for company cars that businesses provide to their employees or for self-employed. You may not know this, but we already have double cab utes are exempt from fringe benefit tax, which seems crazy, right? We're supposed to be moving to a low carbon economy. So we just want to include EVs and e-bikes, low carbon vehicles in general, into that category too. And so when companies are buying these vehicles new, that means the second-hand fleet will get picked up by Kiwis down the line. We don't buy new cars, generally speaking, ordinary Kiwis, because we're too cheap. Yes. Thirdly, we'll give grants of up to $10,000 for businesses to make better use of digital technology and to improve energy and resource efficiency. This sort of stuff has been done overseas for 20 years. It improves the business bottom line, and it's good for the environment at the same time. Like I said, it's been done overseas. It works. We should just do it. We should just do it wholesale here in New Zealand. We'll rein in big business with better competition law and making sure they pay their bills on time. We'll improve the links between universities and polytechs and small business, make sure they're more responsive to your needs and actually can help you solve your problems. And lastly, as I mentioned, we'll encourage productive investment by driving it away from speculation in property into businesses that actually create jobs and exports. Make no mistake, TOP is the party for small business. And lastly, the climate-friendly recovery. We can have a growing economy and improve the environment at the same time. That's what real progress looks like. Businesses can be part of the solution. So I've already talked about making businesses more energy efficient, but we need to do that with our households as well. So that's things like insulation, more energy efficient appliances, all that sort of stuff. Governments have been doing it little bitsy here and there, but they need to be doing it wholesale. We need to be making massive investments there because it's a win for our environment and for our back pocket. And the only reason that governments aren't doing enough of it is because it's not sexy. Secondly, we need to plant our erosion-prone land in native trees, but we don't need to blanket the country in pine trees. It's crazy. The Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, the Parliament's chief environmental advisor said, folks, last year, this is a dumb idea. Don't do it. And an hour later, the government puts out a press release about putting more money into pine trees. Cynically, this is the only thing that Labour, the Greens, and New Zealand First agree on, is planting pine trees as a way forward. Don't get me wrong, pine forests are great if they can stand on their own 2 feet. We shouldn't be subsidising them. So we need to make sure that is absolutely not the case. Infrastructure is massive, right? I mean, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to future-proof our economy. The government is planning to spend billions after this election. This election is a once in a lifetime opportunity. It is so important to get this right. But sadly, politicians of all hues are using this big sack of money that's sitting there to promise all sorts of stuff. National, of course, want to tunnel through the Brynderwyns. Shane Jones wants to build his port up in Northland. So they're all at it. They're all buying votes. Even the Greens are talking about some stuff which is pretty questionable. I mean, they want to make a massive investment into solar energy. And again, don't get me wrong, solar is going to be part of our transition to a low carbon economy in the future. But would you bet all your money on solar? I mean, when the biggest issue New Zealand's energy system has right now is the time when we burn all of our fossil fuels is 7 p.m. in the middle of winter. It's about now. It's when everyone gets home, turns on the kettle, puts on the heat pump, and cooks dinner. Now, have a look outside your window right now and tell me, how useful is solar going to be in dealing with our peak electricity demand? It's not. It's just not really suitable for New Zealand. So all politicians are promising stuff which is of questionable value, and they're doing it to buy votes, essentially. They're doing it because it sounds good and they want to buy votes. We need to get their snouts out of the trough. All of these investments need to be on the basis of business cases that actually show a good return on investment for the economy and our environment at the very least. We have to be making investments now that will allow us to reach our emissions targets for 2050. Now, TOP haven't done business cases on everything, so we don't know what we would suggest putting money into, but we do know that one of the best investments we can make is in helping our cities build medium density housing around our public and active transport networks. And I talked about this before. The reason this is so important is because instead of building houses way out where people have to commute in, which costs a whole lot in transport costs, truly affordable housing is much closer to where people need to be. So that's why we need to allow this. The big barrier, though, is local government infrastructure. This is the big opportunity for New Zealand to invest in. It's things like water, public transport, and active transport, footpaths and cycleways. All of those things need a massive investment. Local government is responsible for 40% of the infrastructure in this country and only has 7% of the revenue to deal with it. That is a massive, massive challenge. And that's why we've got water pipes bursting all over the country. We've got, poo pipes bursting down here in Wellington. We've got a drought up in Auckland. It's not a drought. Come on, let's get real. It rains all the time up there. All of these problems come down to the lack of investment in local government infrastructure. And the politicians need to step in and sort it out. This is a massive issue. And again, if I'm being cynical, the reason why no politician of either hue wants to solve this problem is for two main reasons. It's one, they don't want local government to look good and to take the credit for what they're doing. They want to be there cutting the ribbons. And secondly, things like water infrastructure aren't sexy. They're below ground. Again, there's no ribbons to cut. So it's just not politically sexy enough for them to worry about. Sure, the government is making a small investment in sorting out our water infrastructure, but that's a drop in the bucket compared to what's going to be needed. So that would be our priority in terms of the infrastructure spend, because it will allow people to live closer to where they need to be, which is good for the environment and will be good for housing costs at the same time. Lastly, we need to pay all that back. We're going to need to increase the price of carbon over time. So what we're putting to voters here with our plan is to say, what we want to do is we're going to invest so that all of this stuff is cheaper for you in the future. We can reduce your emissions, help you reduce emissions. But by the way, if you're not going to take these actions, then the price of carbon will rise over time. And we think it needs to be double what it is now pretty quickly. So that's about $70 a tonne, and rising continually into the future. That's going to need to happen anyway if we're going to meet our emissions targets. So that is TOP's priority for 2020. If you are in Rongotai, there are various ways that you can help. You can volunteer in my campaign. You can, of course, donate. You can go to top.org.nz. And we are also going to be asking people to share videos, about the issues that affect them, either their interactions with winds or their problems with housing, their trials of being a small business owner, or their hopes and dreams for the future in terms of the kind of investment we want to see now and preparing ourselves for climate change. So that is my presentation. I'm now open to questions from the people on Zoom to start with. If we get some time, we might get to the questions on Facebook as well.
Sure, thanks, Geoff. We had one question come in, and it was, what is TOP's plan around reforestation with native trees specifically?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, what we're looking at is reforesting. We think the priority should be to reforest erosion-prone land. So we should be encouraging farmers to plant any of the non-productive land that they have in natives, things like gullies, erosion-prone land, the areas around their rivers, so that they get rewarded for that. And at the moment, they don't always get rewarded for that through the emissions trading scheme. And that's a bit of an oversight, because there's regulations about how big these areas need to be. The other problem with the emissions trading scheme is it doesn't reward farmers for looking after the native forest that they had pre 1990, and so we want to do that as well. We think we need a holistic environmental system of incentives for farmers that should encourage them to, ease back on the intensity of land use, particularly in places like Canterbury where there are, real water quality problems. Make sure that their waterways are planted and their erosion-prone land and gullies are planted, all that sort of stuff. They should get rewarded for that as part of that wider system, because farmers have to think about water quality, they have to think about climate, and they have to think about biodiversity at the same time. We should have one simple system which rewards them for good things across all those three.
Great, thanks. Okay, I'm going to open the room to questions. We've got Lewis with a question, so I'll put him on.
Hello, Geoff. Hey, quick question. The Price of Fish documentary that was on a few weeks ago on TV3, have you seen it? Are you aware? Your views on the rescue fish policy that it's aiming at, do you support it? Yes, no? Yes.
I mean, so yes, I've seen the rescue fish documentary, and absolutely our quota management system, so for those of you who didn't see the rescue fish documentary, it really highlights the failures of our quota management system. And I totally agree with the issues that documentary raised. There are real problems with our quota management system, particularly in the inshore fishing stocks. we won't go into those right now, but I recommend watching that. I think it's up online, The Price of Fish. What this group are suggesting in terms of this rescue fish package, it looks pretty sensible to me, but the big thing that needs to happen here is that it needs to start with, and the creators of this package acknowledge it, that their proposal is simply a starting point, because the treaty settlement with Māori involved the quota management system. We need to sit down with our treaty partners and renegotiate that. And that really has to be the starting point of any reform of the quota management system. So yes, I agree with them. Agree with the problems that they've raised. Their solution, from what I have seen in the time that I've been able to see it, it looks sensible. But we need to start, that's only a starting point for the conversation. We need to sit down with the treaty partners and renegotiate that. Now, obviously, there is no one Māori view on a lot of this stuff. It's going to take quite a big conversation. But I have heard, some hapu come out and in support of the rescue fish package, which is, that is encouraging as a starting point.
Great, thanks, Geoff. We've got a couple of others. People's mics aren't working, so I'll ask them. You discussed managing immigration as a factor in addressing the housing crisis. What's TOP's proposal in regard to this?
Yeah, so I mean, we have an interesting situation now, right, with COVID, that an incredible opportunity that we have been presented with to reset our immigration system. There are a few issues with our immigration system, but the main one really is around the skilled migrants visa, and exactly how skilled do you have to be to become a resident in New Zealand effectively once you go through that system. And I think a lot of people would be shocked to see that a lot of fairly mundane work like supermarket managers, if you like, are considered to be on the skill shortage list and therefore can come in. And of course, what you've seen in response to that out there in the labour market is a lot of people just calling their jobs manager jobs, and so they meet the skill shortage criteria. So there's real problems with the existing system, and it definitely needs addressing. I think this is it's a chance for a fairly big conversation about what do we want in terms of a population strategy. What do we want our population to look forward long term? This is an opportunity to have a royal commission, perhaps even some citizens' assemblies as part of that can look at particular issues in the system, such as what is our population strategy. And we need to be having conversations about what should be the bar for skilled migrants in New Zealand, because obviously, I think the level that the bar is set at right now would surprise a lot of people, but by the same token, we simply can't, we simply can't set a threshold, like an income threshold, for example, because we do need quite a lot of, for example, people in our nursing homes who are relatively low paid. So there's quite a big conversation to have there, which we think would be best through a royal commission and potentially some citizens' assemblies as well.
Great, thanks. We've got another question here on the UBI. You say that the establishment parties are too afraid to look seriously at something like a UBI. How do you expect to work with these parties if you get into government to implement this policy? Have you had good conversations with leaders of other parties on this, and do you think there is a compromise to be achieved?
Yeah, and I think this answer applies for housing as well. I mean, you could scrub UBI from this question and just put in some of our housing policies, which might be a little bit scary for some establishment party politicians to swallow. What TOP is proposing is being a coalition partner that the big partners can blame for putting forward bold policies that actually putting forward what needs to happen. I mean, a lot of, as I said when I was talking about the housing policy, a lot of politicians know the current situation and they know what needs to happen, but they're not willing to take these conversations to the public. So if TOP has a platform, that's exactly what we will do. We will raise some of these big issues and, put the arm up the back of the establishment parties to make them do what they know needs to be done, but they're just too scared to do. So, our alternative slogan could just be blame TOP. It's another way of putting it.
Great, thanks. We had another great question. Re climate change. Animal agriculture is often left out of the conversation and mitigation, but it's a huge contributor to New Zealand's emissions. Will TOP bring this to the table in government if voted in?
So again, I really recommend the comments I made about the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment's report last year. That was called Farms, Forests and Fossil Fuels, and I recommend having a look at that because it talks quite a bit about the science of methane. The way that methane is presented as a percentage of our total emissions isn't really fair because methane is a short-lived gas, and so you could quite easily use a different metric for methane, which meant that it was only an equivalent of what a third of what it's currently put forward at, if you know what I mean. So yes, animal agriculture is an issue. Is it as much of an issue as some people claim? It's certainly not. I don't think it's certainly not. We don't need to get it to zero like we do need to get fossil fuels to zero. That's the real issue here. Is the priority has to be on reducing fossil fuels. And yes, we need to reduce our agricultural emissions, but not by nearly as much as we need to reduce our fossil fuel emissions. So that's why TOP's policy really focuses on fossil fuel. In terms of the agricultural side, like I said, I think we need a holistic system which rewards farmers for farming in an environmentally friendly way. It is possible to have animal agriculture and farm in an environmentally friendly way. It just has to be less intensive than it is in a lot of places right now. And we know that actually farmers can farm less intensively, having 10 or 20% fewer animals on the land, and they would actually have the same profits. Even though they're not selling as much milk or meat, they have lower costs when they have fewer animals on the land. And of course, the environmental impacts of that go down hugely. So if we just encouraged our farmers in that direction to be slightly less intensive in their farming practices, that would go a long way. It would go a long way for us to be, operating under regenerative agricultural principles, for example, and it would go a long way to reducing our environmental impact, and could throughout most of the country be done without lowering profits as well. So that is definitely part of the system I outlined before when I was talking about pine trees and encouraging the planting of natives. That's under our holistic plan, I guess, for land use.
Great, thanks. We've got a couple more questions. I'm going to unmute some people. Take it away. Anne?
Oh, hi, Geoff, it's Anne here, your old mate. I've got a question about the investor migrant category. This is related to immigration. You were saying that the bar for immigration is lower than everyone might think. Well, the bar for investor migrants is actually lower than everyone might think. I did some work a few years ago for Greater Auckland on investor migrants and discovered that they come in with money, sure, but quite a lot of them spend some money on a house, and it's quite a rare migrant who actually spends it on a business. But that's what the category was invented for. So, do
Yeah.
you have any views on that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is a similar idea to foreign investment in general. We should be making sure that these when money is coming into the country, that is going towards businesses that are actually productive and create exports and jobs, rather than speculating on land prices, which is part of the problem, right? I mean, but again, that part of the attraction for people to come here and do that sort of thing is because our tax system favors us to do that. So we do need to look at how we tax housing compared to other investments as well. But 100% agree with what you're saying. Yep.
Great. We had one other question. This one, I'm not sure if you have an answer, but what is the policy regarding cats, given that they are spreading toxoplasmosis, presenting the greatest threat to Maui's dolphins?
Well, we don't actually, contrary to popular belief, thanks to our former leader, we don't actually have a policy on cats. But I am aware of a lot of work has gone on into this on behalf of the SPCA and the Vets Association, and the idea of what they are putting forward is making sure that cats are managed in a similar way to how dogs are, so that they have microchip and IDs on them, so that cats that are not owned and are causing problems can then be managed, particularly in sensitive wildlife areas. And I think that is a completely logical way going forward. Effectively, that would allow cats in those sensitive wildlife areas to be managed in much the same way as stoats and rats and possums are.
Great, thanks, Geoff. We've got a couple more. So one was, what is TOP's plan to support the regions?
Yeah, well, the UBI is the most pro-region policy that you will come across, because you get it wherever you are. And remember, in New Zealand, that currently that there are some regions in the country that you can't live in because winds won't allow you to live there, because they deem those areas as not having enough work, and therefore you can't live there. We won't give you your benefit if you live there. So a UBI is blind to all of that. It's blind to who you live with, where you live, and will actually be a major encouragement for people to live in the regions. So I would say that is one of the most crucial parts of our pro-regional policy. In terms of other issues, I mean, I really do think that we need, again, one big area that we should be looking at is ensuring internet connectivity is available right throughout our country, so that people can work from everywhere. We have really learnt from COVID that remote working is possible, and again, that will be great for regions too, for people to be able to live in all sorts of parts of the country and still be still being able to work from wherever they are. The last area I would say really is around finding new innovative land uses. So, TOP is going to be putting one of our big focuses is putting much greater investment into innovative land uses, so that we can reduce environmental impact and actually provide a lot more employment in our regions. And so, for one example of that would be finding ways to use the offcuts that happen in our forestry sector. which all often, you know, as we see, they end up on East Coast beaches all the time. Those, you know, those offcuts could be used to provide wood energy. They could be used to create biochar. There's lots of possible industries that we could create in our regions, which again are good for the environment and good for the economy at the same time. And that's the sort of stuff that we want to invest in.
Great, thanks. I think we've got one more question here in the room to close us out.
So in terms of COVID-19, at the moment, basically, what are your thoughts on making people pay for coming back into the country? What are your thoughts on... Yeah, why don't we'll leave it at that. What are your thoughts on people paying to come back into the country?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't think, well, it's not obvious because some people disagree with me, but I don't think Kiwis who are coming back long term should be made to pay for coming back into the country. They are going to be making a contribution to New Zealand long term, and that price is a very small price to pay for the rest of us to keep COVID out. Think of it as an insurance policy, if you like. But once our COVID-free status is reinstated, knock on wood, I do think we could be doing a lot more to benefit from that as a country in terms of charging people who want to come into the country either for a holiday or to work or to be somewhere that is COVID-free. We could charge them a very high price for that quarantine to absolutely cover the costs of quarantine and for the government to make some revenue at the same time. I mean, we are going to be in demand as a country, and we want to make this the place where talent wants to live, right? We want to be in demand. So this is a great opportunity to seize on that, to upscale our quarantine and to make some revenue off foreigners at the same time. That would be my thoughts on that particular point. So I think is that the last question, Holly?
Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to close. Anything that didn't get answered tonight, we can try get Shai to answer in her live stream later.
Yeah, and what I would say is, I mean, this, like I said, this was intended to be a roadshow about Rongotai, and so if there are any people out there in the Rongotai electorate who want to get in touch, my email is leader@top.org.nz, or you can just message my Facebook page, Geoff Simmons, or put a comment on the live stream below this Facebook page, and we can get in touch. And if you want to volunteer and get involved in my campaign, get in touch as well. So thank you very much for your time.